So this appears to me as though the protesters don't seem to understand the dynamics at play that, on the one hand, permit them to occupy, and on the other, would allow for a crackdown. So the kind of organizational structure that allowed for the transformation from what looked like a protest that people, who were of the boomer generation might be nostalgic for, thinking back to the 1960s, to look like a tent city, something that has been highly demonized in the United States and is associated with the homeless. And unfortunately, in our society, people have very little sympathy for the homeless. So why is there this lack of understanding? Why isn't there more of an analysis put forth on what it is the protest is doing and how it is able to do it? This eviction makes me think about the initial attempt to evict the protesters when the so-called cleaning of the park was scheduled. And I think it's very important to note when the mayor said, oh, well, we're going to clean the park, that was in an environment where members of the media who were against the protest were referring to the protesters themselves as human garbage. So with a wink and a smile, this was a kind of euphemism for we're going to kick everyone out and we're going to shut down this protest. And that eviction was stopped because, one, organizers knew ahead of time when it was scheduled to happen. They were given advanced notice. And two, they were able to mobilize thousands of people to come into Zuccotti Park and to stay there with the understanding that if the police moved in, they would be arrested. So the police would, in order to evict the protest, have to carry out these mass arrests. And all the while, CNN is there, Al Jazeera is there. It's not going to look good on the national news, and it's certainly not going to look good on the international news. So why was it possible to evict them this time? It was interesting, after that victory, after they defeated the initial eviction, to return to the park that night to sleep out and notice in the morning, to defend this space, there were thousands of people that night to sleep there, to stay there, maybe 200, most, very few. So there's that strange contradiction between people who can support the movement or would defend the movement and that those who are actually carrying it out. But again, it's incredibly time-consuming to live in a park. I mean, it's a huge commitment. It's hard to balance work life, student life, and this kind of protest, which is incredibly time-consuming. To go back to the understanding that the protesters had of, again, why can we occupy this park? Why can't they evict us? And I think it's quite clear that the reason is, well, if public opinion's against us and the media is not there, then they can evict us, no problem. I mean, people would have a discussion about what's the legal status of the park, what are the laws that govern it, but if you know just a little bit of the history of New York, you'd be aware that a tent city was evicted in I believe, early 90s, but with no regard to the law. So the state isn't restrained by the law. They kind of do what they will. So what does restrain them? What restrains them is really what it looks like on TV. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but I think that that's true. And since the mayor had said we were going to clean the park, activists and occupiers organized to scrub the floor of the entire park to show how clean it was. Now, of course, the cleanliness of the park was a non-issue. There are countless parks in New York City that are filthy, so there's no reason to take the mayor on his word and imagine that he's concerned with clean parks. He's not. And so you had the protesters all imagining that was the logic at play. You know, how if only the park was clean enough, then they won't evict us. On the one hand, that could be a good photo op to put in a newspaper or to show on TV, but there was very little press coverage, and there were very few protesters with cameras while all that was going on. So at best, it was street theater and with no audience. Just before I run out of time, I wanted to also address the question of imperialism and the protests' understanding of U.S. imperialism. There's a real division in the protest. I mean, I understand, speaking to a Pakistani audience, that you're no doubt concerned about the CIA's drone program in Pakistan and the just campaign of murder that is going on in your country. So what does the Occupy Wall Street movement think of this? It's divided. You have many people who make the connection, who understand the relationship between this country and the way it is organized to serve the interests of a tiny and very wealthy elite, and its activities abroad, its activities internationally. And there are others who see that as unpatriotic, and they see it as a liability towards recruiting mass mobilization. So they want a broad coalition, and they don't want to alienate anyone by seeming unpatriotic. The issue of whether or not flags should be displayed comes up often